and asked if we would like to have an expert present to our students about Pearl Harbor. So of course, we did our due diligence and said yes, of course. And it's with pride and honor that I stand before you to introduce the Chief Historian of the U.S. Arizona and Pearl Harbor, here to speak to you about Pearl Harbor. And keep in mind, my grandfather fought in World War II. In the Pacific, he was on a life raft for 2 weeks, and he survived. Think about your histories, your relatives who fought in World War II. Think about those who have perished fighting for freedom here in America. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Daniel Martinez.
Well, good morning. And aloha. You're not used to that. But that's what I'm used to. I've been fortunate to be affiliated with the National Park Service, oh my gosh, over 30 years now. Pearl Harbor is something that is really a general term, and probably one of the things, if you take from this presentation today, is a generic term for the attack on Oahu. The whole island was under attack, and it brought the United States into World War II. A reluctant country, by the way, to be in that war. Why it's special to me is both sides of my family were there. On the Mexican-American side, young Juan Perez was at Schofield Barracks. He was 18 years old. My grandfather, who was in his 30s, was a Navy federal worker at the shipyard. My mother, who was 10 years old, was at Mass that morning with her mother. And my mom had just finished her hula lesson the day before from a comic hula dancer named Hilo Hattie. There actually was someone named that way. That Sunday was planned to be a picnic for the family on the north shore of Oahu, where the big waves are rolling in as we speak, and they did so in the winter. I became affiliated with the story when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. I found out they were there.
Mr. Mahoney, dial 123.
I didn't know what Pearl Harbor was, but I was soon found out. And if there was a road that charted my career, it was the affiliation that my family was at a landmark period of history, the opening of World War II in Hawaii. So what I'm going to do is take you through rather rapidly, so this is really strongly visual. It's hard to believe how many photographs were actually taken during the attack, not only by us, which we were slow to respond with photographs, but the Japanese took photographs as well. Why? Why would they take pictures of such an event? Because it was an aerial attack, and they needed to be able to photograph during the attack to see the damage they were inflicting. So let's start our road to Pearl Harbor with this presentation. This is the ghostly remains of the stern of the USS Arizona. It is a tomb for nearly 900 men. The average age of a sailor that is now entombed in that ship, about 19 years old. Many of you are in your teens. We have the youngest sailor, was a guy named, his last name was Britton. He enlisted in the Navy, we believe, at 15 and a half. He celebrated his 17th birthday the day before the attack. This is the ship as it was in 1941 up in Bremerton. It carried a crew of nearly almost 2,000 men. She stood nearly 90 feet in the air. She was 2 football fields long. She represented the power and might of the United States Navy. She was a main battleship that was constructed and commissioned in 1916. And she lost her life at Pearl Harbor. She's still there, one of 2 ships that are still resting in the waters of Pearl Harbor. Going back, this is the USS Utah. This is another ship that is still at Pearl Harbor. And this is her picture taken in 1940 up in Bremerton, and she was an auxiliary ship. But what's interesting about her is she could tow targets, she could be remote controlled from air, land, or sea. She was one of the most sophisticated ships in the Navy. And on the morning of December 7th, she was torpedoed and rolled over in 12 minutes, taking a young sailor from San Diego, California, named Rudy Martinez, to his death. His mother never got over that. She ran a small Mexican restaurant in San Diego, and for the rest of her life, she grieved for her son. And so did his high school sweetheart. They were scheduled to be married that January. This rare color photograph shows the Pacific Fleet at sea. They painted their ships in dark blue colors in preparation for hostilities they think may come. The road to Pearl Harbor is an interesting one, and one that could have been avoided. War between Japan and the United States was not inevitable. We were close friends. We exchanged, both navies exchanged pleasantries. They visited Pearl Harbor. We visited Japan. But in the 1930s, Japan took a dangerous course in which it realigned itself with militarists that sought to bring Japan's, economic and military goals forward with military action. Perhaps there's no one single event, if you learn anything from this, that sealed the fate of Japan, was Japan's alignment in 1940 with Hitler's Germany and the fascists of Italy under Mussolini. They became part of a tripartite pact. It's just a bad deal because for the United States, they weren't going to deal with the Nazis and they weren't going to deal with the fascists of Italy, and Japan seals its fate by lining up with them. Shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, because of this tripartite pact, Hitler feels obligated to go to war against the United States. Actually, he didn't have to, but he did, and in doing so, Winston Churchill, when he heard the news of the attack, he knew that, he said to his colleagues, England will survive, and we will win the war. For Japan, there was a celebration. These posters you see celebrate this alliance with the Nazis and the fascists of Italy. And this is a dramatic photo in which the tripartite pact is now being formally signed and a speech being given by a representative of Japan. It's interesting to note the person that signs it is a man named Kurusu. He'll be sent to the United States in the early days of 1941 to try to negotiate a peace that will not ever happen. But here you can see Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring and admiring their work of the tripartite pact, but it would spell disaster for everyone you see in that picture. In the American news, it is also noted. Most historians see this as that fateful alliance. One of the things you have to know about Pearl Harbor, and for you as students, this is like specific history, but it's important. Pearl Harbor is only 45 feet deep. For an attack to be made by Japanese torpedo planes, or torpedo planes from any country, you have to solve a problem. And this is where math comes into play. One of my least favorite subjects, by the way. But when you look at the geometry of what was done, the British attacked an Italian fleet in a little harbor in Italy called Taranto. What's significant about it is it was shallow water. The Italians felt very comfortable there. No one could really attack them. But the British figured out a way to do it. And this is how they did it. They attacked at night. They figured out a way to drop shallow water torpedoes. You know how they did it? When a torpedo is normally dropped from a plane, it falls at a pretty high rate. It plunges to a depth of over 100 feet before it levels off. It has a motor behind it that's whirring to take that torpedo forward at about 30 knots. But if it goes into the mud, then it's nullified, right? Well, they attached wires to the torpedo. And as the torpedo dropped away from the aircraft, the wire stretched, right? And it stretched to a point that it broke the fall, and then it snapped. So the torpedo didn't hit as hard, and it could run in shallow water. At night, they attacked with a handful of planes, less than 20 aircraft. They took on the Italian fleet at night, and the way that they figured out to light it up is they got to some of the planes above to drop flares and lit it up like daylight. This is the arrangement of the Italian fleet in which they sank 3 Italian battleships, damaged others, and proved to the world that shallow water torpedo attack could happen. The Japanese sent a delegation down to Toronto with permission of Hitler to observe what was happening. They had an idea in mind. And that idea was, if they were going to go to war with the United States, they would attack the American fleet at a shallow water anchorage known as Pearl Harbor. These are pictures of what it did to those battleships. This was earth-shaking. Nobody had ever done this. And the world wondered, as Americans in Washington wondered, particular admirals, are our fleets safe? Hawaii was known as the Gibraltar of the Pacific. And in this dramatic picture, this is the change in command where Admiral Husband Kimmel accepts his role as Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. It's January 1941. Kimmel will receive the attack in less than 10 months. This is a battleship Pennsylvania. It's a very formal affair. It's covered by the news. It's a big deal. In those days, it was covered by radio and still photography. This is our island of Oahu. This is where I live. And when you go to Oahu, you are going to head towards the North Shore. That's up towards the top. But these shows you where the radar sites are. This shows you where the main airfields are. And it shows you Pearl Harbor itself and its narrow entrance. So rather than getting it all complicated, it had airfields, it had fortifications, and it had troops, and it had a fleet. And that's why the Japanese sought to strike us there. During this summer of 1941 and 1940, maneuvers were always done, readying the fleet for an action that they believed would take place in high seas. In other words, we'd sail out and meet them on the high seas and fight the traditional battle. The Japanese had changed their military naval doctrine. They believed in naval air power. Now, to us today, this is like, well, yeah, why not? This was revolutionary. Nobody believed in airplanes. Nobody believed that the airplane was really a viable weapon. Now, they saw it being used in Europe. The war's already raging 2 years from 1939. Airplanes are used in traditional battles, but carriers? No, that can't happen. Well, the raid on Toronto changed some of that thinking. These are the battleships, these majestic warships that they had in those days were, the pride of the fleet. They were named after states: California, West Virginia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arizona, Maryland. All of the states that had a name of a battleship adopted it. They raised money for silver service. It was their ship. The Japanese also had pride in their ships, and these are the type of torpedoes that will be used at Pearl Harbor. The only thing missing from them is the wooden fins. So I told you how the British did it, right? They used these wires to break the fall. And the Japanese didn't know that. They didn't call the British up and say, hey, how'd you do that? No, they went to their own technology. And this is one of the things. The prejudice against the Japanese was part of the problem. We saw them as small people, really not up to our standards. Not very smart, probably couldn't fly, as they said in one of the magazines, I think it was Life, because their eyes were shaped in such a way that they have bad depth perception. Oh yes, you know about prejudice, don't you? Well, it can be deadly. And in this particular case, there was no finer aircraft in the world than the Japanese aircraft at that time. The finest fighter, finest torpedo plane, finest horizontal bomber, finest dive bomber. We were outmatched. And with this technology of applying special wooden fins to the torpedoes at Pearl Harbor will run in 23 feet of water at a speed of over 30 miles per hour. When they hit a warship, they'll blow a hole in it that you could drive a semi-truck through. The Oklahoma will later be hit by 9 torpedoes. Literally, her guts opened up. She doesn't have a side of a ship. She has a series of holes, which will take that ship in less than 12 minutes and trap 420 men inside, 429. But before we get to the details, know that 2 special bombs had to be developed, the shallow water torpedo and the horizontal bomb. The horizontal bomb is taking a 16-inch shell, fairing it down so it's aerodynamic, putting some fins on it, and dropping it from 10,000 feet in a group of 5 bombs, of 5 planes. 10,000 feet. That means the ships below look like toy boats, but they weren't. This is Battleship Row. If you look at here, you'll see what appears as white waves. This is part of the camouflage, so that at sea, they could confuse the enemy as to the speed of the ship. This is the battleships Nevada and Oklahoma. And in the background is a hospital ship called Solus. And you can see the hillsides there in Hawaii at that time were sugarcane fields. No one was more responsible for the success of the attack than this young man you see right here. His name is Takeo Yoshikawa. He's a Japanese naval officer. And that young man right there knows the Pacific Fleet more than any person in the world. He knows about them. He studies them. He reads our journals, the Naval Institute proceedings. Oh, he reads that. He can identify a ship from a distance of half a mile as what it is. He is sent to Honolulu 7 months before the attack. He comes as a consular officer, works out of the consulate on New Wano Avenue. His workers don't like him. You know why? Because they never see him working. He's working. He disguises himself as a sugarcane worker above Pearl Harbor. He gets a job as a dishwasher in the officers' club at Pearl Harbor. He hires a taxi and goes around to all the bases. He hires an aircraft and flies over the island and sees the defenses. He is the most consummate spy of World War II. Not really a spy, I guess. He's working espionage. Do you think we do something like that? Sure we do. We want to find out, and he does. The Japanese Navy knows where every ship is, knows how many aircraft we have at the airfields. This is the key to the success of Pearl Harbor. That is Pearl Harbor in 1941. In the center is Ford Island. That's a naval air station. All around you can see the anchorages. See the narrow entrance? Only one ship can go in or go out. One admiral refers to it as a mousetrap. Did we know about Pearl Harbor coming? Well, conspiracy books, which I love to hate, they always make history simple, don't they? Whether it be Dallas or whether it be Pearl Harbor. Oh, it was a conspiracy. History made simple for those who are simple. But for those of you who are serious students of history, which many of you are, you want to know how it happened, not an excuse for how it happened. And we stumbled into war because we were clumsy about our diplomacy, as the Japanese were clumsy with their adventure to go to war. But here in this paper in Honolulu, it says that they're ready for war and it may come over the weekend. This was done in October of 1941. But this man is sitting in the center. He is the architect of Japan's change. This is Isoroku Yamamoto, Fleet Admiral. And it is his plan to attack the Pacific Fleet from the outset, demoralize the Americans, take from them their Pacific Fleet, and perhaps they'll sue for peace. Now, why would they think that? Why would they think a country of our status, after we're defeated so roundly at Pearl Harbor, would want peace? Because the Russians were defeated in early 1900s, 1904. And after being defeated by the Japanese in a major naval battle at Toshima Strait, they sued for peace. But they don't understand one thing about us. You make us mad? Well, we don't sue for peace. We'll fight to the end. So you talk about a public relations bungle. Well, that's what happens. Yamamoto and his officers will plan the attack about 8 months out before it happens. Their targets are the American carriers. These are these ships you see are tied off right off from Lahaina Roads in Maui. They're the primary targets. The leader of the fleet that will be sent, which will be approximately 31 ships, is this man Nagumo. You'll hear about him again in a place called Midway. This is Mitsuo Fuchida. He will lead the attack on Pearl Harbor. He's one of the best aviators the Japanese have. He will survive the war by a near miracle. He should have been killed at Midway. He's not. He should have been killed in the Marianas Battle. He's not. He finds himself in August of 1945 in a place called Hiroshima. He's called up to Tokyo for a meeting the day before the bomb is dropped. He will later meet a B-25 crew member who was part of Doolittle's raid. He's captured by the Japanese. He's not treated very well. He's a Christian fellow. His name is DeShazer. And he's so angered by his anger towards the Japanese, he feels as a Christian, he has to go back to Japan and convert the Japanese. He runs into Mitsuo Fuchida in a railway station, and Fuchida becomes a Christian, and then he becomes an evangelical minister and writes a book later called From Pearl Harbor to Golgotha, and his main area of preaching is the United States. He also sees himself as a Pearl Harbor survivor. He goes to the Pearl Harbor survivors, which are this large group of men and women that survived the attack in an organization formed in 1964, and he asked to become a member. They respectfully declined. The signal for the attack is climb Mount Niitaka. One historian wrote that was an appropriate signal for the Japanese fleet when it was at sea, because they were about to climb the highest mountain in their history. And here's the fleet in the northern part of Japan getting ready to sail over 4,000 miles to Hawaii. This is the crew members on board. Briefings on the way. Leaving what is the northern part of Japan with 6 aircraft carriers. Nearly 350 planes will take place in the attack. This is footage of the officers in the wheelhouse. Here they are less than 2 days away from Hawaii. High seas make it very difficult to refuel, but they figure out a way to do that. And meanwhile, in Washington, the crisis of the relationship between Japan and the United States has reached a very difficult moment. You can remember just recently the negotiations between Iran and the United States, very difficult, got down to the last minute before they were able to resolve it. They have sent their envoys to Washington. It is the desire of part of the Japanese government to avoid war with the United States. This is Admiral Nomura and Caruso who are in Washington negotiating. But this is taken aboard the Akagi on the way to Japan, from Japan, shows the famed Zero fighter. This is a last-minute briefing to the pilots before they ready for the attack the next day. Pilots are ready. Navigators are briefed. And we have no pictures of the first wave taking off because it took off in darkness at 6 a.m. 2 waves of aircraft will be launched. The first wave, 183 planes. The second wave, an hour later, 167 planes. But this is what it would have looked like that morning for this first wave. Planes are ready, warmed up. 6 aircraft carriers turn into the wind and begin their launching phase. This dramatic photograph, if you look, you can see the morning sunlight on the mattresses that are tied up around that large tower. That's to sword any bombs if they're attacked. The shrapnel will hit that rather than the people. And in this dramatic still photography, you can see this plane roaring down the deck, which is a horizontal bomber, the pilot in the center saluting as he goes by, and the plane lifting in the air on its way to Pearl Harbor. You can see here the torpedo planes, pretty rare photograph, there's not many pictures of this, but you can see the large wooden fins on the end of it. But that morning in Hawaii was a typical Sunday. As my family ready to go to church, others were still working, and one group was at the radar site. A war warning had been sent to Hawaii on the 26th of November. It came directly from Washington. But for some reason, on December 5th, it was decided by the commands that leave would be given and to stand down. Here is one of the ships. You could see number 139. That little destroyer left over for World War I is the USS Ward. Its gun is still standing at the Capitol in Minnesota. And it's there because it fired the first shot of the Pacific War. These are the Japanese submariners. There's 9 of them here. These are the hero gods later. They will all lose their lives, but they will be in 2-man midget submarines that will enter the harbor before the attack the night before, lay low, and then rise up to torpedo ships. And so the attack on Oahu is really a 2-pronged attack, one from the sea and one from the air. This is the crew that was photographed later for publicity. They were all from Minnesota. They were all part of Naval Reserve. And that's the gun that fired the first shot of the war. Now, how did it do that? Well, the USS Ward had a new captain. His name was Outerbridge. He became the captain of the USS Ward the day before on Saturday. And so they went out on their first patrol. There was a big area of water in front of Pearl Harbor called the Defensive Sea Area. Nobody's supposed to come in there unannounced, submerge. You have to let people know because it's a secured area. Well, that morning, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, there had been a little submarine contact. Later, at 6 o'clock, a bigger contact. They could actually see the submarine. Outerbridge had been up all night. He had gone back to his cabin. He was asleep. They woke him up. And everybody's trying to check out this new captain. They're a little surprised the captain has come with his housecoat on, up to the wheelhouse. A housecoat is a Japanese kimono. He sees the target and he immediately orders the ship to go to general quarters, and he fires the first shot at that midget submarine that's exposed. The first shot misses, the second shot hits it, and it begins to go down in the water. A seaplane that's also on patrol comes in, and within a few minutes, Captain Outerbridge has fired the first shots of the Pacific War and World War II for the United States. Nobody knows what's really going on. He sends a message into the headquarters. We have fired and sunk a submarine operating in the defensive sea area. This is at 6:30 in the morning. The attack on Pearl Harbor will begin just before 8 o'clock. This is the patrol plane that was in the air. These are the Japanese planes coming over Oahu. One other item, at 7:02, this contraption you see up here is radar. This was the beginning of radar, and radar picked up these planes at 7:02. What did they think they were? They thought they were friendly. B-17s coming in from California. And the officer on watch, who was his first day on the job, tells the radar operators, don't worry about it. The first wave will come into Oahu, not at 7:55, which is the time that everybody memorizes. The attack begins at 7:46, when the Japanese will strike all of our airfields at Wheeler Field, Bellows, Hickam, Kaneohe Naval Air Station, Pearl Harbor Naval Air Station, Eva. All of our airfields come under attack at the same time. And in 15 minutes, air power in Hawaii ceased to exist. We can't defend ourselves. Later, this will be called a surgical strike. This map shows you the installations, and these are the attacks as they begin on the airfields taken by the Japanese. This is at Kaneohe Bay. All of our seaplanes are taken down. So the eyes of the fleet. And this is the attack on Hickam near Pearl Harbor. And then the torpedo attack begins. These huge water geysers you see going into the air are nearly 600 feet in the air. That's the power of a torpedo slamming up against a battleship. And this is taken in sequence as a Japanese plane flies over. Over here, the PBY ramp is erupting in fire. The main battleship row you see at the top of Ford Island. And here, the significant picture of torpedoes going in towards the battleships, oil gushing out of the ships. And if you look very carefully, you can see a water geyser rising up from the USS West Virginia, which is right in the center here. A remarkable picture. But also items of history. One of the Japanese planes at the top just turning away after it's dropped its torpedo. Right here in this area has been a subject of a lot of historians looking at what appears to be a Japanese midget submarine firing torpedoes at Battleship Row. Water geyser rising up between the mainmast and the foremast of the USS West Virginia. And over on that side, the USS California with oil gushing out. The most searing moment in the Pearl Harbor attack is this one. The horizontal bombers flying over have just dropped bombs on the Arizona. What you see is the forward magazines of the Arizona exploding. And in that instant, 1,177 officers, sailors, and Marines are vaporized, turned into atoms. Because up forward, the forward magazines has exploded 1,800,000 pounds of ammunition. The ship is lost in seconds. Here's how the Japanese saw it. You can see the Oklahoma capsized. You can see the smoke coming up from the Arizona. That's Ford Island at the bottom. Turning away, you can see the damage to Pearl Harbor. This is along Battleship Row. And the second wave then comes in at 9 o'clock and begins attacking targets of opportunity. These are local residents in Honolulu. Many of them Japanese American, looking up to the skies and wondering what's happened. Very much like bystanders did in New York in 9/11. Friendly fire rained down all over. That means shells being fired at the Japanese planes were landing all over the city of Honolulu. Here's what a shell will do to an automobile. Wheeler Field comes under attack again. And a bomb that misses the field lands right next to a residence. In this shot is one of the rare shots that show the actual bombing taking place, taken by a Japanese photographer. Here you see the plane getting ready to dive down at the top and just pulling away. But there's a fourth plane in there. Anybody see it? Well, it's right there. So this is a sequence unlike anything taken in World War II. You see the actual complete bombing of our airplanes on the ground. Right here, right there, over there, and they're flying away. At the airfields, the destruction of the B-17 bombers that were flying in from California that morning. You can see one in the air there. And here they're flying over and they're being fired at by their own anti-aircraft. Damage done to Hickam. Japanese now turning away and begin flying home. The fires that are ignited at Pearl Harbor and the airfields will burn all day. Along Battleship Row, the Arizona will burn for 3 days. And here in this dramatic and patriotic picture of America's flag flapping in the trade winds, you see this beginning of the foundering of USS California. And all along in the harbor are a series of bombs still being dropped as the Japanese now pull away and the second wave just finishes off its work. But one gallant moment was the sortie of the USS Nevada. When you go to Pearl Harbor today, when you see these grounds is where the visitor center is today. This road is Kamehameha Highway, and a civilian photographer stopped and took pictures of the Nevada. You can see her right over there passing the Arizona and now trying to get out of the harbor. A series of nearly 60 photographs were taken of this moment as she moves down the harbor on her way out, as the Japanese now spy her at this point and begin attacking her as the second wave has arrived. A a series of bombs will strike her. This is a Japanese photo that's pretty rare. It shows the Nevada badly damaged. All of those disturbances of waters are bombs that missed her. But she's badly damaged, and she eventually will put into the ground and go aground and stop there. Pictures of her moving down, you can see at the top of this hangar, which is now the Pacific Aviation Museum. And here, one of the rarer photographs, you can see a Japanese plane just pulling up and has dropped a bomb on the USS Shaw. Of course, that explosion, and here's a machine gunner on top firing at that plane. And in that moment, more aircraft coming in to strike. This is a bomb hit on the bow of the Nevada. And as she moves along, photographers continue to shoot pictures of her. Explosion up forward, and then a dramatic near miss. Look at this water geyser going up in the air. Moving forward with intact, these series of photos of the Nevada were captured in one searing moment that became an iconic image. And that was this photograph that was taken by a photographer that became the photo of Pearl Harbor. In the next few moments, the attack will end, fires will continue to burn, and the United States has been plunged into World War II. A survey was done, and one of the greatest salvage operations ever done during the war was there in Pearl Harbor. And in these final moments, these pictures taken of the last moments of the attack. The Japanese planes landed on their carriers at approximately 12 o'clock that afternoon. So, I know we're coming to the end of our program. How many minutes do we have? 20 minutes. Okay. I will take you to the debriefing of the Japanese pilots. Right there. Is that the end of your presentation?
You can finish up the aftermath.
Okay. Finish the aftermath.
Quiet. One second. Just give 1 second. Just quiet.
Hold on, guys.
Hold on.
This will show you some of the damage done, but this is the other damage. Those that lost their lives. 2,390 people lost their lives. And I'm going to advance this because we won't get to that story. But Pearl Harbor today, when you visit it, this is the USS Arizona, as she looks today, with the memorial stretched across her. She's a final resting place for over 900 sailors that are still aboard her. Mr. Lawrence, who was here, Reverend Lawrence, who was here, will be conducting and be part of an interment where one of the survivors is going back to the ship. His ashes will be placed in the ship on December 7th. And this is what the Arizona looks like today underwater. This is the memorial that was built in 1962 that stretches across her. This is the wall that has all of their names. 23 sets of brothers. One father and son. In the museum are artifacts that you can see today. And this is looking down from the dedication well where President Kennedy came for the first president to visit in 1963, 4 months before Dallas, and placed a wreath in this well you see here. Next to the Arizona Memorial is the USS Missouri, where the surrender was signed by Japan in 1945. This is the visitor center. The brand new visitor center was built in 2010 that you can see. We went from 1.5 acres to 7 acres. A number of exhibits for you. And then, of course, the new challenge in the Pacific. Guess who has an aircraft carrier now? But that chapter of history, for good or bad, will unfold in your lives. Because the Pacific is still a place of contention, but also a place of peace. For Japanese that come there, young students like yourself, we now celebrate over 70 years of peace between our two countries. We are no longer enemies, but friends and allies. And the lesson of history that all of our former enemies, the Italians and the Germans, are now our closest friends and allies. So if anything came out of World War II, was a lesson of history, and 70 years of peace. Thank you.
Boys and girls, true to the Diman way and spirit, we do two things when we have guests here at Diman. First, we give them a gift. So on behalf of the administration, the staff, and the students, Daniel, I'd like to give you a Diman sweater.
Okay.
For you to wear. It won't be appropriate in Hawaii, though. So while you're here in New England, you can wear a Diman sweater.
It'll be appropriate in Hawaii.
Sometimes.
When I get up in the mountains, this will be good.
And the second thing is that we always feed our guests here at Diman. So Daniel, I would like to invite you to have dinner, lunch with us in our room 251 with a meal prepared by our students. I appreciate everything that you shared with us.
I realize that most of you, any of you and most of you have to get to class. If there is anyone, well, yeah, you really do. But if there is anyone that is with their instructor today and would like to stay for just a couple minutes and have individual questions, please feel free to do that. And might I say, if you ever have the opportunity to go to Oahu, while you're there, visit both the Arizona Memorial, but also go to a place called the Punch Bowl. They have some of the most amazing mosaics there I have ever seen in my life. So if you ever get to Hawaii, that's two places to stop and see. Thank you for your attention this morning, and those of you who need to get right to your classes because you're someplace different now, please do so. Thank you.